They mocked him, underestimated him, and thought he wouldn't fight back, until one perfectly executed move left the school in stunned silence. The first thing William Mercer noticed about Redmond High School was how clean everything looked. Not just clean, polished, controlled. The glass windows reflected the world too perfectly, the floors gleamed under fluorescent lights, and the hallways stretched out too orderly for a place full of teenagers. It wasn't like his old school in Birmingham, Alabama, where the walls were covered in student murals, and you could hear someone beatboxing in a stairwell at any given moment. Redmond High felt sterile. His mum had called the move a fresh start. His dad, always more direct, had called it a necessary change. William wasn't sure what to call it yet, but the moment he walked through those front doors, he could feel it. People were looking, not staring. That would be too obvious. But the quick glances, the barely whispered comments, the way some students eyed him from head to toe before turning away, it all said the same thing. Who's this guy? William wasn't small for a 16-year-old. At 5'10", he had the kind of build that came from years of training, not just working out. Lean, controlled muscle. He moved with the quiet confidence his father had drilled into him. Steps measured, posture straight, never slouching. And yet, to them, he must have looked like an outsider. Because he was. He made it to the front office without incident, collecting his schedule from the overly polite receptionist. As he walked out, a group of students near the lockers caught his attention. A tall, broad-shouldered guy with perfectly styled blonde hair was leaning against the lockers, flanked by two others, who laughed at something he had just said. Their laughter wasn't loud. It was the kind meant to be overheard, just enough to make sure the target knew they were the joke. William wasn't the target, yet, but he could feel it. A slow calculation. The blonde guy, Ryan Callowell, according to the class roster he had glanced at earlier, gave him a look that wasn't exactly hostile, but it wasn't welcoming either. It was the kind of look someone gave when they were deciding whether or not to make a problem out of you. William had seen it before. Ryan smirked, leaned toward one of his friends, and said something low enough that William couldn't hear. The two others chuckled, looking at him just a little too long. William exhaled slowly through his nose and walked past them, ignoring it. He had nothing to prove. His dad's voice echoed in his head, the same advice he'd been given 100 times. Strength isn't about showing off. It's about knowing when to walk away. So, he walked away. But the thing about guys like Ryan, they don't like being ignored. And this wasn't the last time they'd crossed paths. But William didn't know that yet. William had been at Redmond High for less than a week, but he already knew how things worked. The school had an unspoken order, a quiet hierarchy that didn't need to be spelled out. The athletes ran things, the wealthy kids acted like royalty, and everyone else just found a way to exist without drawing attention. William? He was somewhere in between. He wasn't loud, wasn't looking for trouble, but he also wasn't timid. And that alone made him stand out. People like Ryan Callowell, they thrived on easy targets. Kids who shrank back, kids who laughed nervously when they were insulted, kids who didn't know how to respond. William wasn't one of those kids, but Ryan was determined to make him one. It started small. In the hallways, a shoulder bump that wasn't accidental. A "watch where you're going" muttered just loud enough for William to hear. A notebook, accidentally, knocked off his desk in history class. Ryan would flash that smirk afterward, like he was testing something, waiting for a reaction. William gave him nothing. Then came the comments. Didn't know they let kids from the hood in here. Mercer, you ever think about trying out for football? I mean, you people are good at that, right? Man, you're quiet. No smart comebacks? I thought you guys were supposed to be funny. The worst part? Ryan never said it outright in front of a teacher. It was always just low enough that the wrong person could dismiss it as a joke. Just subtle enough that Ryan could shrug and act innocent if someone called him out. And the others, they laughed. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to make William's hands tighten into fists under his desk. He thought about telling his dad, but he already knew the response. Handle it with discipline. Don't stoop to their level. And his mum, she'd worry. She'd tell him to talk to a teacher, and William knew that wouldn't help. The school wasn't going to punish one of its star athletes over something they couldn't prove. So William handled it like he always had. He ignored it. At least that was the plan, until one moment changed everything. It was lunch period, Friday. William had just sat down with his tray, minding his own business, when a shadow fell over his table. Ryan. Behind him stood Zach and Brandon, his usual entourage. Ryan grinned. Loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, he said, "Man, I've been wondering. How come you don't talk much, Mercer?" "What, cat got your tongue?" William didn't respond. He took a bite of his food, chewing slowly. That answer wasn't good enough. Ryan grabbed the apple off William's tray and tossed it across the cafeteria. It landed with a dull thud near the drink station. A few heads turned, students waiting to see what would happen next. William set his fork down. Carefully, deliberately, he looked at Ryan, meeting his eyes for the first time all week. Ryan smiled, mistaking William's silence for fear. And that's when he made his biggest mistake. He shoved William's shoulder, hard. Loud enough for everyone to hear, he said, "Come on, Mercer, do something." William inhaled deeply, his muscles already coiled, controlled. And this time, he didn't walk away. The cafeteria froze. Conversations cut short. The sound of plastic trays scraping against tables stopped. Even the lunch staff behind the counter paused, watching from a distance. Ryan Callowell had just shoved William Mercer in front of everyone. And now, everyone was waiting to see what he'd do. William sat still for a moment, his mind already calculating. His father's words rang in his head. "You don't fight with anger. You fight with control." Slowly he pushed his chair back and stood up. No rush, no panic. His movements were precise, effortless, like a man stretching before a workout. Ryan's smirk widened. "Oh, we got a tough guy," he said, looking at his friends. "You gonna swing, Mercer? You gonna act like a thug now?" William's expression didn't change. He just tilted his head slightly, examining Ryan like he was an equation that didn't quite add up. That was the moment Ryan realized something was off. William wasn't nervous. He wasn't flinching. He wasn't even blinking. The grin on Ryan's face faltered, just a fraction. A hesitation. A slight shift in his weight, like some deep primal instinct was kicking in, warning him that maybe, just maybe, he'd made a mistake. But it was already too late. Ryan reached out, shoving William again. This time, William moved, fast. Before Ryan's hands could fully extend, William's left hand shot up, gripping Ryan's wrist in one smooth motion. His right hand came up next, lightning quick, controlled, clamping onto Ryan's elbow. Then, with zero effort, William pivoted just slightly, using Ryan's own momentum against him. Ryan's feet left the ground. His back slammed onto the cafeteria floor before he even knew what had happened. A sharp, stunned silence filled the room. Ryan gasped, genuinely shocked, his body sprawled on the tile. He scrambled to sit up, eyes wide, confused. His friends took a step forward, but William didn't even look at them. Instead, he crouched down next to Ryan, his voice low, even. "Don't touch me again. No threats, no insults. Just a statement." And that's what made it so much worse. Ryan wasn't just beaten. He was dismissed. William stood up, dusted off his hands like he had just moved a chair instead of a person, and picked up his tray. He didn't even look back as he walked away. The cafeteria was still dead silent. Students stared at Ryan, at William, at each other. Then, somewhere in the back, a single voice whispered, "Holy sh!" And just like that, the floodgates opened. Whispers turned into murmurs. Murmurs turned into excited conversations. Someone had caught the whole thing on their phone. Someone else was already texting about it. And Ryan, he stayed sitting there on the floor, his jaw clenched, his hands curled into tight, white-knuckled fists. Because he knew. By the time the last bell rang, everyone in Redmond High would be talking about what just happened. But this wasn't over. By the time the final bell rang, the story had already spread across Redmond High like wildfire. William Mercer had dropped Ryan Callowell in the cafeteria. Not with a punch, not with some wild brawl, but with one clean, effortless move. And that's what made it so impossible to ignore. If William had thrown hands, if there had been a messy fight, it would have been different. It would have been just another school scuffle. Kids would pick sides, rumors would twist the details, and eventually it would fade. But this was something else. William had made Ryan look weak. He had made him look helpless, and in a place like Redmond High. That wasn't something people forgot. William walked out of the school building, ignoring the stares. Some kids watched him like they were seeing him for the first time. Others whispered the moment his back was turned. A few just looked outright nervous. Ryan wasn't waiting outside. That would have been too obvious. But William wasn't stupid. He knew how this worked. Guys like Ryan didn't take embarrassment lightly. They didn't just get up, dust themselves off and move on. They waited. They plotted. They made sure that when they got their revenge, it was worth it. William had seen it before. And he knew. This wasn't over. At home, he barely made it through dinner before his mum noticed. She had that way of looking at him. That way of tilting her head slightly like she was scanning his face for hidden details. "Everything okay at school?" she asked, setting down her fork. His dad, sitting across from him, glanced up too. William shrugged. "Yeah, just a regular day." His mum didn't buy it. His dad just kept eating. That was the difference between them. His mum asked questions. His dad waited for answers. Later that night, William's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Unknown. "You think you're tough? You got lucky today." Unknown. "Watch your back." William stared at the screen. Then he exhaled, locked his phone, and set it face down on his desk. This wasn't unexpected. It wasn't even surprising. But now he had a choice to make. Would he let this go? Pretend it never happened? Or would he make sure Ryan and everyone else understood exactly who he was? Because whatever happened next, it was coming. Monday morning, everything felt different. William could tell before he even stepped inside. The sideways glances, the hushed conversations that stopped when he walked past. It was all the confirmation he needed. The story had officially grown legs. By the time he reached his locker, 2 freshmen had already darted out of his way. A junior he didn't even know gave him an approving nod, and then there were the ones who suddenly wanted to be his friend. "Yo, Mercer, you really put Callowell on his ass, huh? Dude, I heard you barely even touched him. He just dropped like a sack of bricks. Bro, you got hands like that. And you don't even talk. That's cold, man." William ignored most of it, giving nothing more than a glance or a short nod. Because this wasn't respect. This was entertainment. They weren't looking at him like a person. They were looking at him like a spectacle, a rumor come to life. And that's when he saw Ryan, standing by his usual spot near the main entrance. But something had changed. The usual cocky smirk, gone. The easy confidence, missing. Instead, Ryan stood stiff, his fists clenched at his sides. He wasn't alone. Zach and Brandon flanked him, just like always. But now they weren't laughing. Ryan met William's gaze for half a second. Then he looked away. William almost smirked. Almost. But he knew better than to think Ryan had given up. Guys like him didn't just accept a loss. They waited for a rematch. Lunch was worse. William could feel it before he even sat down. The air was thick with expectation. People watched him like they were waiting for something to happen, like they thought Ryan might storm across the cafeteria for a round 2. But Ryan wasn't even in the room. His usual table? Empty. William had just started eating when someone sat across from him. Not one of Ryan's guys. A girl. Ava Sinclair. She wasn't someone he had spoken to before, but he knew who she was. Smart, confident. Never the type to follow the crowd. She set her drink down and studied him for a second. Then she said, "You know, you didn't just beat Ryan. You humiliated him." William took a bite of his food. Chewed. Swallowed. Then, he picked the fight. Ava smirked. "Yeah. But you ended it. That's worse for him." William didn't respond. She leaned forward slightly. "Look, just be careful. Ryan's dad is on the school board. You think he's gonna let this slide?" William met her gaze. Steady, unfazed. "Does it look like I care?" Ava exhaled, shaking her head. "You should." She stood up, picking up her tray. Just watch your back. She walked away, and for the first time since Friday, William felt something he hadn't before. Not anger, not annoyance, curiosity. Because whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to be another cafeteria fight. By Wednesday, the energy at Redmond High had shifted again. Ryan Callowell wasn't just avoiding William, he was actively erasing him. No more comments, no more smug glances, no more games. Nothing. For some guys that would have been enough. William had won, wasn't that the point? But something still felt off. And that feeling only grew stronger when Ava found him after last period. She didn't waste time. Ryan's dad is trying to get you expelled. William barely reacted. For what? Ava scoffed. They don't need a reason. He's claiming you attacked Ryan, that it was unprovoked. He's pulling strings to make it stick. William wasn't surprised. He'd seen this play out before. Different place, same script. A white kid starts something. A black kid finishes it. Suddenly the rules don't apply the same way. He ran a hand over his face, inhaling slowly. So what do I do? Ava hesitated. Then, fight back. Not with fists, with proof. That night, William got to work. By morning, he had everything he needed. Screenshots of texts, footage of the cafeteria fight, the full clip, not just the takedown. Witnesses who were willing to back him up. When he walked into school, he wasn't alone. Ava was with him. So were two other students, kids he barely knew before all this. But they knew the truth, and that was enough. They marched straight to the principal's office, and by the time the meeting ended, Ryan's dad didn't get what he wanted. William wasn't expelled, he wasn't suspended. Nothing stuck, because the truth wasn't just on his side. It was undeniable. Ryan didn't come back to school for the rest of the week. When he finally returned, he wasn't the same. Quieter, less confident. He kept his head down, his voice lower. He wasn't afraid of William. But he understood. William hadn't just beaten him in a fight. He had beaten him where it really mattered. And that's what people remembered. William never asked for respect. He never asked for attention. He just wanted to exist without being tested, without being challenged, without having to prove himself over and over again. But the reality? Some people only learn through consequences. And when you finally show them what you're capable of, they never forget. Sometimes standing your ground isn't about throwing a punch. It's about making sure the truth is louder than the lies. If this story resonated with you, hit subscribe and let us know in the comments. Have you ever had to prove yourself when you shouldn't have had to?